Hey, I wanted to chat a little bit about the fires and the collective trauma that's happening right now for those of you folks who are in the Okanagan and who are really deeply impacted by the fires. As many of you may know, is I'm planning to come out to Vernon to put on an Ancient Wisdom Constellations weekend, September 9th and 10th. And I really deeply considered, is it appropriate to come and to put this out there, especially because it's such a tender time. And then the message that I received from the field and intuitively was that this is an important time to do this work, because in constellations work, we're actually tending to that collective trauma. It's actually a space for us to come together and work with what's come up. And I think it's really important to speak to the fact that in our current landscape of this country, a huge collective trauma that is present is lack of ritual and tradition and culture to hold us in the traumas of displacement, of forest fire. Traditionally there would be practices and ways that we would hold each other to move through the trauma, to digest it, to be with the crisis energy of it. And for so many of us, the part that is like the deep existential trauma or grief that arises in times like this is an ecological grief about, what's happening to the environment, but also a cultural grief of not having things to lean into to help us actually process it on a deeper level. And so this is why I've felt so drawn to constellations work, because that's part of the work, is we're actually intentionally recreating a space of connection, coming together and tending to those collective pieces that are alive, like actually having a place to come together and move through it in a way that is supportive and healing. And so what I'm visioning for those 2 days is to really offer it as a space where we'll do some embodied constellation processes where we're actually working with the collective field around the fires. We'll actually connect in with the energy that's happening for the community, for those that are displaced, for those that are, just holding space for everyone that's displaced, and also some work around the ecological grief about what's happening to the forests and to, nature and to our climate. So I wanted to speak to this because I think it's really important to understand that when we are in these times, part of the healing of this loss of culture or ritual is a re-remembering of when we're in these times, we do need to somehow find a way to tend to it and to come back together. And so just to speak to this a little bit in our nervous systems, right? When we go into a crisis experience, we go into the sympathetic or dorsal, but mostly sympathetic part of our nervous system. And a way that we want to tend to this is that that's appropriate to go into that. But then at a certain point, we actually need to come out of that part of our nervous system. Once safety comes in, we have to support a movement out of that place. And the way that we do that is through connection. So the way that our nervous system finds a way back into safety is by coming back to others, coming back to each other, and mirroring to one another a landing back in safety. And also being in spaces that emulate safety with sights and sounds and smells and all of this that helps us actually re-land in a sense of belonging, re-land in a sense of community, re-land in a sense of ground. And so our culture really has a whole journey that we're going on to re-remember how to do that. Because otherwise, if we don't consciously do that, what happens is that trauma lives inside of our nervous systems. So if we go into these crisis energies, we go through these experiences, and we don't land together to process it and move it through our systems, what happens is we've all gone through the trauma together, but it stays stuck. And there's an isolation. Our nervous systems stay in sort of a survival-y isolation energy. And then what that does is it just keeps getting passed down the lineage, or it keeps being experienced in our life, but we might not have any concept that that's where it's coming from. And so if we zoom out to an even wider view of our culture or our generationally, we also, during these times of the fire and these times of the forest fires, we're also being deeply invited to what is being touched on is the collective places of in the past historically that weren't dealt with. So what is coming up is, all the places where our ancestors were in ecological impacts, natural disasters, and they weren't able to process it. They weren't able to move it through their system. So all of that gets reignited and re-triggered. And what we want to do is we want to remember the human wisdom that has been there and does live in ourselves of how to process it through so that we can learn and grow from what happened, and most importantly, make meaning of the experience and come back together. When I led the grief ritual in February with my dear sister Lindsay, one of the things that really came through in that was an understanding that as humans, it's overwhelming sometimes to take in the amount of loss and the amount of trauma that is a part of being alive. And what I came to understand deeply in my body was that the only thing that helps anchor us in that is the connectiveness of that, like the universal experience of that, the fact that we all go through that. And we need to have experiences that help us feel that, because then the love, the connection, the witnessing it together actually becomes the stabilizing force. It actually becomes the thing that helps us land in the truth of what's happened. And so I'm inviting this because whether you feel called to go to Ancient Wisdom and to be a part of that, which I love and I think would be great service to the collective, but also how can you bring that into your life right now, whether you were directly impacted or not? It's alive in the field. It's impacting all of us. We're all feeling it. And some it's more direct than others, but we need to right now make space to tend to it. We need to make space to feel it. We need to make space to really deeply land in the truth of what we've just been through and what's alive right now, so that we can be present, so that we can support our nervous systems to come back into connection, and that we can learn together as humans. So if you're interested, reach out. I'd love to have you at Ancient Wisdom. I'm going to be sharing more about what that'll look like. Collective constellations are my favorite. They're so beautiful. In collective constellations, we're really working with collective pieces that are alive in the energy field, such as forest fires, such as maybe the energy of the forest, such as, ecological grief. And there's two things. It's helping us heal what's alive in us, but we actually are tending to the collective field. We're actually bringing love and attention and awareness to the collective field, and that helps it heal. And when we think about what is alive in the collective, there's so many waves of trauma that are being experienced on the planet over and over again that are due to the lack of processing or it being unprocessed. And so when we can tend to it, we're actually helping lighten the load collectively. So I'm excited and feel honored that I get to be in this position and in this role. And I put out this invitation to you if you feel called. I'll include a link. There's a link in the bio. And also just DM me if you're interested or have questions. Okay. Thank you.